Okay, let's start. Number 1. The Kali Yuga prophecies. The year is 2006. The document in front of Sanskrit scholar /Kak is 3,000 years old. The document beside it is a stack of social science journals from the last 2 decades. He is cross-referencing them line by line. At some point during this process, he stops. He reads one passage from the ancient text again, then a third time. Then he sets down his pen. The Bhagavata Purana was written between 400 BCE and 500 CE, preserving oral traditions extending to at least 1000 BCE. Canto 12, Chapter 2, contains the account of the sage Shukadeva, describing the signs of the Kali Yuga, the fourth and final age of the world's current cycle. The description is 74 specific signs long, not 74 general observations. 74 enumerated, checkable conditions. Shukadeva begins. In the Kali Yuga, the property of a man will be determined by his wealth alone. Honesty and devotion will be measured by one's ability to pay. Truth will be sold. Those with strength will rule, abandoning principle. Leaders will seize the property of their subjects, he continues. Streets filled with confusion. The sky no longer gives rain at the right season. Forests depleted. Rivers run dry. Sacred rivers contaminated. People consuming intoxicants and abandoning traditional wisdom. Children ruling households. The old serving the young. This looks, at first, like the kind of vague moral decline narrative that every ancient culture produced. But the specificity accelerates past the point where that explanation holds. The text describes leaders who pass laws specifically for their own financial benefit, rather than their people's welfare, a description that requires democratic or representative structures to even make sense. It describes people worshiping money above relationships at a systemic, structural level. It describes food with no nutritional value. It describes communication reaching across vast distances, instantly. It describes a sky that behaves erratically, raining at wrong intervals, producing heat when it should not. These signs require specific technological and institutional conditions to exist. Ancient India had none of them. The mainstream explanation is that the Kali Yuga prophecies are intentional negatives, the inverse of the Golden Age described earlier in the same texts. Wendy Doniger, distinguished service professor at the University of Chicago Divinity School, notes that apocalyptic texts across cultures describe similar conditions of social disorder. Any civilization in decline will find resonance in a sufficiently detailed list of societal failures. The signs, she argues, are designed to resonate universally, not to specify historically. But the structural specificity is the problem. /Kak's 2006 analysis identified 60 of the 74 signs as currently verifiable in modern society using measurable social science metrics. David Frawley, founder of the American Institute of Vedic Studies, published a parallel analysis in 2009 identifying 58. Neither study searched across all of human history for matches. Both applied the signs to the current period and found 58 to 60 simultaneous matches across unconnected domains. Climate, governance, economics, ecology, family structure, food systems, information behavior. Not scattered across a century. Simultaneously. In the same narrow window of modern history. The mainstream counter-response is that any 74-item list will find matches across enough domains. But several of these signs require conditions industrial food production, democratic electoral structures that can be legally subverted, global telecommunications that simply didn't exist until recently. They can't be retroactively applied to Rome or ancient China or medieval Europe. They fit one era. This era. One prediction remains unchecked. The Bhagavata Purana states that the Kali Yuga ends when a figure named Kalki appears, the 10th avatar of Vishnu, born to a righteous family in a northern village, who restores the order of the first age. No one has claimed that title. When 73 items on a 74-item checklist are verified, the 74th becomes the only question left. From India's enumerated prophecy, we cross the Pacific, where a Native American tradition committed to oral memory before Columbus arrived described specific technologies by name technologies that wouldn't exist for another 400 years. Number 2. The Hopi Blue Star Kachina. The year is 1963. Anthropologist Frank Waters is sitting with Hopi elders on the Arizona mesas, recording oral traditions that ceremonial leaders called Kikmangwi have transmitted in unbroken lineage since before European ships appeared on the American horizon. He has been working on this book for a decade. What he writes down has been memorized with the precision of ritual, word for word, generation by generation. The Book of the Hopi, published that year, contains a prophecy in 9 parts. The Hopi call it the Nine Signs. It was carried in oral tradition from the pre-Columbian era by ceremonial leaders whose function was preservation, not interpretation. Sign 1. A white man comes who strikes the land and speaks no Hopi. Sign 2. Spinning wheels filled with voices crossing the land, first the wagon, later the wheel itself. Sign 3. A strange animal resembling horses with great horns overrunning the land, longhorn cattle. Sign 4. Iron roads crossing the land in every direction, railroads. Sign 5. A giant spider's web crisscrossing the sky, power lines, and the visual pattern of the internet's physical infrastructure when mapped from above. Sign 6. Rivers of stone made of iron crossing the land from sea to see, the American highway system, completed in the 1970s. Sign 7. The sea turning black and killing many living things, oil spills. Sign 8. Youth wearing long hair, joining the nations of the Indian peoples, carrying unexpected spiritual understanding, generally interpreted as the convergence of counterculture and indigenous rights movements across the 1960s and 1970s. Signs 1 through 8. Checked. In sequence. Sign 9. A dwelling place in the heavens falls with a great crash, appearing as a blue star. When this sign comes, the ceremonies of the Hopi will cease and the fifth world will begin. The mainstream explanation is that Frank Waters shaped the prophecy substantially through translation and cultural mediation. Armin Geertz, professor of religious studies at the University of Aarhus, published a 1994 analysis arguing that the 9 signs in their current specific form cannot be verified as intact pre-contact oral tradition and show evidence of Waters' interpretive hand. But the pre-Waters documentation exists. Ethnographer George Dorsey collected Hopi oral materials in 1897. Anthropologist Elsie Clews Parsons recorded Hopi accounts in the 1920s. Both collections compiled before Waters began his work, before railways reached deep into Hopi territory, contain the same core elements. Iron roads, cobwebs in the sky, a gourd of ashes falling from above. 3 independent collections, same elements, decades apart. The gourd of ashes appears in all of them. The Hopi describe a weapon carried in a gourd that falls from the sky at altitude, burning everything below the point of detonation. Rivers turn poisonous. Sickness spreads outward in rings from the impact point. The burning cannot be stopped by water. On August 6, 1945, a uranium bomb was detonated at 1,900 feet above Hiroshima, Japan. The altitude was chosen specifically because detonation above the surface maximized the blast radius. The device was roughly cylindrical, approximately 10 feet long. The fireball reached 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Rivers were contaminated by radioactive fallout. Radiation sickness spread outward from the hypocenter in concentric rings for years afterward. No Hopi elder in 1850 had seen an explosion larger than black powder. The physics of fission didn't exist as a concept in any culture until 1905. The description has no referent in anything that existed when it was recorded. Gourd of ashes. Sign confirmed. 1 sign remains unchecked. In 2007, astronomers confirmed that Betelgeuse, a red supergiant approximately 700 light-years distant, has been losing mass at an accelerating rate consistent with pre-supernova stellar behavior. A Betelgeuse supernova would appear in daylight skies. At certain wavelengths, its color would register as blue-white. The Hopi ceremonies continue. The 9th sign does not depend on any human decision. From prophecy about what will happen, we move to a text explaining why it happens. The Book of Enoch does not predict our fate. It names the mechanism that produces it. Number 3. The Book of Enoch's technology warning. The year is 1947. A Bedouin shepherd from the Tamir tribe throws a rock into a cave above the Dead Sea and hears pottery shatter. Inside Cave 1 at Qumran, sealed in clay jars, wrapped in linen, is a collection of scrolls that the outside world has not read for 600 years. Among them is a complete copy of the Book of Enoch. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had preserved the only other known complete version since the 4th century CE. The rest of the world had lost it, debated what it once contained, and moved on. Now they had it back. Scholars who read it carefully found something that made them stop. The Book of Enoch was written between 300 and 200 BCE, drawing on oral traditions older still. It describes a group of divine beings called the Watchers, who descended to Earth and taught humanity specific arts. Chapter 8 lists them. Azazel teaches men the making of swords and knives, shields and breastplates, the working of metals and their finished forms. A watcher named Semjaza teaches enchantments. Armaros teaches the resolving of enchantments. Barakigel teaches astrology. Cockabel teaches the constellations. Others teach cloud reading, earth signs, and methods for controlling forces within the sun itself. Then chapter 16 states the consequence. The archangels report to God, "Thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn." The transgression is not the secrets. It is the transmission, the act of giving this specific knowledge to beings who lacked the wisdom to use it without destroying themselves and the world around them. The mainstream explanation, developed most completely by John J. Collins of Yale Divinity School in his 1998, The Apocalyptic Imagination, is that the Watchers' forbidden arts are literary metaphor for the origins of human corruption. The Essene community that produced this text was explaining why civilization is broken. They blamed the introduction of metalworking, cosmetics, and astronomical calculation as the original sins against a simpler, purer existence. It is sophisticated theology. It is not technology forecasting. But the sequence is specific in a way metaphor usually isn't. The arts in Chapter 8 appear in this order: metallurgy, weaponry, chemical manipulation, astronomical and mathematical calculation. This is not a random collection of human skills. It is the exact developmental sequence that produced nuclear weapons. Metallurgy comes first. You cannot build uranium enrichment centrifuges without precision metallurgy. Chemistry and physics follow. Fission is a chemical nuclear process. Astronomical and mathematical calculation enables targeting and delivery. The sequence in the Book of Enoch runs from bronze swords to the precise instruments required for nuclear detonation at altitude. The chain was not completed in the ancient world. It was completed in the 20th century. In 2020, MIT physicist Max Tegmark referenced this structural parallel in his framework for analyzing existential technological risk. He did not claim the text was prophetic. He noted that the capability sequence described in Chapter 8 mirrors the development path of weapons capable of civilizational extinction. The observation was his, derived independently. The sequence was 2,200 years old. R.H. Charles, who produced the first complete modern English translation from the Ethiopian GS original in 1912, wrote in his introduction that no other ancient text is as specific about the mechanism of civilizational collapse, not the result of collapse, the mechanism that produces it. Chapter 9 records the archangel's final report before God acts. The earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven, the earth crying for its inhabitants. A technology chain beginning with metalworking and ending with weapons capable of emptying the earth of everything that lives on it. Described, in correct developmental sequence, 2,200 years before the chain was complete. From a warning about what the knowledge is, we move to a prophecy that identifies when the choice about that knowledge must be made and names our specific moment as the decision point. Number 4. The Seventh Fire Prophecy. The year is 1833. Henry Rowe Schoolcraft is a U.S. Indian agent sitting across from Ojibwe elders near the southern shores of Lake Superior. He is documenting oral traditions. He has no theoretical framework for what he is writing down. These are field notes, not analysis. Among the materials he records and publishes in his 1839 Algic Researches is an account of 7 ages and a crossroads. A light-skinned people, 2 paths, a warning about what happens if the wrong one is chosen. At this point, the railway has not reached Ojibwe territory. The industrial extraction economy that would strip the Great Lakes forests bare is still decades away. There is nothing in Schoolcraft's 1833 world to suggest what these elements will look like in 150 years. Edward Benton Benai, an Ojibwe spiritual leader from the Lac Courte Oreille Reservation in Wisconsin, formally documented the full tradition in his 1988, The Mishomies Book, The Voice of the Ojibwe. The tradition he records is the prophecy of the 7 fires. Each fire is an age. Each age was predicted in advance by a prophet who appeared at its beginning and described its characteristics and what would follow. The first fire. The Anishinaabe will leave their home by the eastern sea and move inland, following 7 stopping places marked by a sacred shell. The historical migration of Anishinaabe peoples from the Atlantic coast to the Great Lakes region is consistent with this account. The 2nd through 6th fires describe European contact, cultural suppression, near extinction of traditions, and early recovery. Scholars who have cross-referenced the fires against documented historical timelines find the sequence generally consistent. The 7th fire, here, now, its signs of arrival. The young will seek wisdom from elders and find nothing, the traditions having been broken by assimilation. A new people will emerge among those with light skin who carry indigenous spiritual understanding. And the light-skinned race the Ojibwe term is Wemitigujai, which scholar Basil Johnston of the Canadian Museum of Civilization translates as, "Children of technology will reach a fork in the road, 2 paths, one scorched at its edges, well worn by generations of use, one green and less traveled." If we Amitigujai, the children of technology, choose the scorched path of continuing extraction, the destruction they brought with them will turn upon them. If they choose the green path, the fires of all the world's peoples will join, and the earth will be healed. The mainstream explanation, offered by anthropologist Maureen Matthews in her 2016 work with Anishinaabe oral historians at the University of Manitoba, is that the 7 fires tradition is a living framework that evolves through transmission to explain each generation's historical situation. The crossroads imagery, she argues, reflects ongoing cultural interpretation rather than ancient prediction. Oral traditions are not fixed texts, but Schoolcraft's 1839 field notes are fixed. They were written before the railroad, before the logging industry cleared the Great Lakes forests, before the industrial extraction economy existed in any form recognizable today. And they contain the crossroads, the 2 paths, and the specific warning about the destruction returning to its source. This was recorded from living elders in 1833. The word Wemitigujai is the detail that stops researchers. It does not mean Europeans. It means those who come with technology as their primary relationship to the world. The people who carry the tradition say the 7th fire prophet was not describing the color of a skin. He was describing a civilization's defining characteristic. That characteristic is not unique to one people. It has spread to every people who adopted the extractive economic model. Benten Benai wrote in 1988 that the signs of the 7th fire's arrival were already present. 37 years later, the crossroads is not approaching in the tradition's framing. It is here. The choice being made right now, collectively and continuously, is the answer the prophecy is waiting for. From a crossroads in the present, we move to a text that shows what happened the last time a civilization stood in one and chose the wrong direction. Number 5. Plato's Atlantis warning. The year is 360 BCE. In the dialogue Timaeus, an Egyptian priest named Sanchis looks at the Athenian statesman Solon and says something that most readers skip over on their way to the Atlantis story. Many and diverse destructions of mankind have already taken place, and the greatest have been by fire and water. He is not making conversation. He is establishing the context for what follows. What follows is not a myth. It is a mechanism. The debate about whether Atlantis was a real place has consumed scholarly attention for 2,400 years. It has successfully buried what Plato actually wrote. Classical scholar Pierre Vidal-Naquet, director of research at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, published a 1981 analysis demonstrating that Plato uses these dialogues as explicit philosophical paradigmata, the Greek technical term for moral models. Cautionary examples intended to instruct rather than entertain. Plato uses this word himself. The story is the vehicle. The warning is the content. The Krishas, the companion dialogue, contains the mechanism in full. Plato describes the degeneration of Atlantean civilization in specific sequential stages. The Atlanteans were originally half-divine children of the sea god Poseidon, who valued wisdom and virtue above material wealth. Plato is explicit. For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws and well-affectioned towards the gods. Then the transformation. The divine nature faded away as it became diluted too often, and with too much of the mortal admixture. The human nature got the upper hand. And the consequence. They filled with unrighteous power and unrighteous thoughts. The specific shift Plato describes is not general moral decline. It is a structural change in what the civilization measured and valued. The Atlanteans became obsessed with orichalcum, a metal or alloy described as the source of Atlantean wealth, mined from the earth, processed, and accumulated above all other things except gold. The economy reorganized itself around this material. Military capacity was expanded to secure access to more of it. The values of the civilization restructured themselves to justify this priority. The sequence: divine nature, then material dilution, then extraction economy, then military expansion to sustain that economy, then destruction at divine scale. Zeus calls a council. The Critias stops. Mid-sentence. Luc Brisson, director of research at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Paris, analyzed this abrupt ending in 1994. His conclusion: the incompleteness is likely deliberate. Plato's philosophical audience was expected to supply the consequence themselves because they were watching a civilization begin the same sequence. The text ends at the moment of judgment, before the punishment lands, and waits for the reader to consider their own position in the story. The mainstream explanation, advanced by classicists, including Wendy Doniger and others who study degeneration narratives across cultures, is that Plato invented Atlantis as a fictional device to dramatize his themes about the corrupting effect of wealth and power. The moral lesson is genuine. The civilization is not. But the structural account is too specific to be generic moral philosophy. The transition Plato describes from a civilization that values living things to one that values the material extracted from living things follows a precise economic logic. The role of orichalcum in that transition describes a manufactured, processed material that becomes the primary measure of a society's success. We have a name for the measure of a society's total material output. We call it gross domestic product. Plato ended the Critias mid-sentence and let his readers finish it. 2,400 years later, the sentence is still being written. From a warning hidden inside a famous story, we move to warnings that were not hidden. They were burned. Number 6. The Sibylline Oracles. The year is 83 BCE. The temple of Jupiter Capitolinus in Rome catches fire. Inside, locked in a stone chest in the temple's deepest chamber, are 3 books that the Roman Senate has consulted in every national crisis for 400 years. The books burn completely. The Senate dispatches representatives immediately to Erythrae, Samos, Troy, and Sicily to collect replacement prophecies. They return with 1,000 verses from oracles across the ancient world. These are copied onto new scrolls and locked in the rebuilt temple. In 12 BCE, the Emperor Augustus orders a review. He reads every prophecy in Roman state circulation. He personally burns 2,000 of them. No record survives of what those 2,000 said. The original 9 books had a history. The Cumaean Sibyl, a prophetess, at the Oracle of Cumae in southern Italy, offered all 9 books to Rome's King Tarquin, the proud, for a fixed price. He refused. She burned 3, and offered the remaining 6 at the same price. He refused again. She burned 3 more, and offered the last 3 at the original price for all 9. He paid the full price for 1/3 of the content. The first and oldest books burned first. The cheapest, most recently composed material survived. Roman historian Dionysius of Halicarnassus documented this transaction in the 1st century BCE. Livy documented the 83 BCE burning as a catastrophic national loss. Suetonius documented Augustus' 12 BCE purge in his Lives of the 12 Caesars, recording that Augustus burned texts he deemed neither of ancient date nor of recognized authorship, a phrase that, from the most politically calculating ruler in Rome's history, requires interrogation. H. W. Park's 1988 Sibyls and Sibylline Prophecy in Classical Antiquity, and John J. Collins' scholarly work at Yale Divinity School on the Jewish Sibylline Oracles established the current academic consensus. The 14 books we have today are not the Tarquinian originals. They are composite texts, largely Jewish and early Christian compositions, added to a tradition whose oldest core was burned or lost long before scholarship could document it. The surviving texts are religious literature, not state documents. But what survives is alarming enough. Book 4, dated by Collins to approximately 80 CE, describes a great star falling into the sea burning, fish dying in masses. Book 3 describes a coming era when the fruits of the earth will fail, when rulers devour their own kingdoms, when fire will come upon the whole earth and destroy the greatest signs of all. Book 5 describes an eagle the Roman symbol, consistently that overreaches its power and collapses beneath its own weight. These fragments survived. They were not among the 2,000 Augustus burned. What was specific enough in those 2000 that the most powerful man in the Western world found it dangerous to leave intact? What specific future, what specific successor power, what specific collapse of Rome's own empire did he read about and choose to make ash? Augustus was not superstitious. He was one of the most calculated political operators in Roman history. He banned astrology as a public practice while privately consulting astrologers. He made his decisions based on information and probability. The 2000 prophecies he burned were not burned out of religious conviction. They were burned because someone read them first. What was specific enough to burn? What named names? What described the mechanism of Roman collapse in terms too accurate for a sitting emperor to permit to exist? The ash is 2,000 years gone. We don't know what it said. That is the most disturbing fact about the Sibylline Oracles, not what survived, but what someone decided could not. From Rome's deliberately lost oracle, we descend into a desert cave where a different ancient warning survived completely intact, and what it says about global war has no business being written in 100 BCE. Number 7. The War Scroll. The year is 1947, but the scroll is from 100 BCE. A Bedouin shepherd throws a stone into a cave above the Dead Sea and hears clay shatter. Inside Cave 1 at Qumran, wrapped in linen and sealed in clay jars, are 7 scrolls. When scholars finally unroll and translate all of them, one produces a specific problem. It reads like a military operations manual. Not a vision, not a prophecy, a plan. The War Scroll, cataloged as 1QM in the Dead Sea Scrolls system, is a 19-column document. It describes a war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Duration: 40 years. Phases: 7. Geographic theaters: specific. Tactical formations: specific. Weapon specifications: specific. Trumpet signal system: 28 distinct calls coordinating simultaneous multi-front movements. It is not allegory. It is operational planning. Yigael Yadin was the right person to read it. He served as Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces from 1949 to 1952, commanding actual armed forces in actual combat, before leaving military service to become professor of archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He published his analysis in 1962. The Scroll of the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. Yadin was disturbed as a military professional. The tactical formations in 1QM do not match any known ancient combat doctrine. The role of cavalry relative to infantry, the use of coordinated flanking maneuvers with specific timing windows, the employment of reserve units held back until a specific tactical moment rather than committed at the outset. These are principles that appeared in formalized military doctrine after the First World War, not in Iron Age Judean warfare. The 28 trumpet signal system is the most specific problem. Ancient armies communicated with simple signals: advance, hold, retreat, and perhaps a handful of variations. 28 distinct signals, coordinating simultaneous movements across separate units at different battlefield positions, requires communications discipline and coordinated multi-front thinking that doesn't appear in military history until the modern era. Then there are the destroyers in column 1. The text describes weapons delivering their effect from formations outside the normal range of combat engagement. The description doesn't match bows, slings, or javelins, the range weapons of the ancient world. John Duhame, professor at the University of Montreal, whose 2004 The War Texts represents the current scholarly consensus, categorizes this as eschatological fantasy, a marginalized community imagining the final battle they would win using whatever tactical framework they could conceive. The anachronisms, he argues, are projections of modern military perspective onto ancient text, but Yadin was not a scholar projecting. He was a former military commander recognizing. He documented specific tactical principles by name, noted their appearance in the scroll, and identified them as principles he personally used in command. He named the doctrinal parallels with precision. He published them. He did not explain them. Yadin never gave a public account of why a document written in 100 BCE contained tactical formations he recognized from his service in the mid-20th century. He documented the observation and said nothing further about it. His published notes record what he found. They do not record what he thought that finding meant. The scroll is now in the Shrine of the Book Museum in Jerusalem, displayed behind protective glass. The translation cards in English identify it as a religious text from the Qumran community. Visitors find it interesting. Most move on quickly. Yarin found it something else. He wrote it down carefully and said nothing more about it. From a military plan containing knowledge that shouldn't exist in it, we move to a Roman philosopher who observed, in plain language rather than prophesy, precisely what would make such a war inevitable. Number 8. Seneca's environmental warning. The year is 62 CE. The Roman philosopher Lucius Annaeus Seneca is writing letters to his friend Lucilius from a villa in the Campania Hills outside Naples. He is aware that Emperor Nero has been looking for a reason to order his execution for 3 years. He writes anyway. He is describing what he sees happening to the landscape around him, the hills, the rivers, the forests, the farming land outside the city. He is not speaking in metaphor. He is not making a philosophical argument. He is filing an observation. Seneca was trained as a Stoic philosopher, served as advisor to emperors, and managed one of the largest private fortunes in the Roman world. He was a careful observer of concrete reality, not an idealist. When he describes the physical environment of first-century Italy in his letters, he is describing what is in front of him. Letter 90 of his Epistulae Moralis Letters on Ethics, written 62 to 65 CE, describes the transformation of the Italian countryside within living memory. Forests stripped from hillsides to feed construction demand and urban heating requirements that grew with Roman expansion. Agricultural land absorbed into estates producing luxury goods. Rivers running shallower as the watersheds above them were cleared. He writes, "We have stripped the hills and found the forests failing before we find a use for the wood." In his Natural Questions, a scientific text, not a philosophical one, he extends the observation into causation. Book 3, Examining Rivers and Flooding. The violence of rivers is increased by the stripping of mountains. Deforestation causes flooding. This is environmental science, stated plainly, in 62 CE. Book 6, Examining Earthquakes and Ground Movement. We dig up what has been hidden, disturbing the earth below as though above were not enough. Mining destabilizes subsurface structures and alters geological behavior at the surface. Seneca was describing the mechanism of anthropogenic ground disturbance before the concept of anthropogenic impact existed. He extended these specific observations into a causal prediction. A civilization extracting its material base faster than it regenerates will eventually exhaust the base that sustains it. He could see the trajectory from where he stood. Roman grain imports from North Africa were becoming critically important to Roman food supply as Italian agricultural land degraded. The supply chain grew longer because the local source was failing. His final letter 124, written approximately 2 months before Nero's order came, contains this sentence. "We treat the earth as though it were a gift to be consumed rather than a dwelling to be maintained, and one day the dwelling will demand its accounting." The mainstream explanation, offered by Princeton classicist Edward Champlin in his 2003 Nero, is that Seneca's environmental passages reflect Stoic philosophical principles' nature as corrective to human excess rather than scientific observation. The concern is moral, not ecological. But J. Donald Hughes, professor at the University of Denver, documented in his 1994 Pan's Travail, Environmental Problems of the Ancient Greeks and Romans, that Seneca's specific descriptions are verified by modern environmental archaeology conducted in Roman Italy. The deforestation-flooding relationship he described, the mining contamination of water supplies, the soil depletion reducing agricultural yield, all confirmed in the palynological and geological record. He was not philosophizing about what might happen. He was describing what was happening, with accurate causal reasoning about what would follow. James Lovelock, who developed the Gaia hypothesis, the theory that Earth functions as a self-regulating living system, cited Seneca's Natural Questions as the earliest written recognition that human activity could alter processes at a planetary scale. Seneca was forced to open his veins in a bath in 65 CE at Nero's command. His last letters survived the empire that killed him. The accounting he described in letter 124 has not yet concluded. It is still being calculated. From an observation extended forward 2,000 years into our present, we move to mathematics extended forward from 800 years ago into this century. The Maya didn't warn in words. They warned in astronomy. Number 9. The Dresden Codex Flood Prediction. The year is 1739. Johann Christian Gotzi, director of the Royal Library in Dresden, purchases a folded bark paper manuscript from a private collector in Vienna. He has no idea what it is. He stores it in the library. It will sit there identified only as a curiosity from the Americas, for over a century before anyone understands what they are holding. The Dresden Codex is one of only 4 surviving Maya books. The others, thousands of manuscripts, the written record of a civilization that had been calculating astronomical cycles for over 1,000 years, were burned in a single afternoon in 1562 by Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa in the Yucatan town of Mani. He burned 27 hieroglyphic rolls and hundreds of other items. He called them the work of the devil. The Dresden Codex survived because it had been shipped to Europe before de Landa arrived in the Yucatan. Anthony Aveni, archaeoastronomer and professor at Colgate University, published his comprehensive analysis of the Dresden Codex in 2001. His finding confirmed what Maya scholars had long believed. The Codex contains the most accurate pre-telescopic Venus cycle calculations in the archaeological record. The Maya tracked Venus's 584-day synodic period and built correction tables to compensate for accumulated drift. Their calculations are accurate to within 2 minutes per year across a 120-year tracking span. This is the credibility foundation. The people who wrote the Dresden Codex were performing astronomical calculations that European astronomy would not match for another 700 years. Pages 73 and 74 of the Codex are called the flood page. The imagery is specific and not decorative. A sky serpent pours water from the heavens. A black sky deity covered in death symbols hangs above a goddess pours additional water downward. A figure associated with destruction holds 2 crossbones below. These images are tied, through accompanying astronomical tables, to specific configurations of Venus, the Sun, and Mercury in specific positional relationships during specific combinations of the 260-day Solcan calendar and the 365-day Hob calendar. The conjunction is not symbolic. It is mathematically derivable. Tom Sever, an archaeologist at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, published a study in 2002 documenting statistically significant correlations between specific Maya Venus cycle positions and El Niño and La Niña oscillation events in the Pacific. The Venus positions the Maya marked as flood risk indicators aligned with measurably elevated precipitation events in the Mesoamerican region across a testable historical period. This is a prediction that has been tested against measurable real-world data. The test returned positive results. The mainstream explanation, offered by Maya scholar Michael Coe of Yale University, is that the flood page is religious iconography. The chalk rain deity cycle is a common theme in Maya art, and the imagery represents cosmic renewal in the Maya mythological framework rather than meteorological forecasting. The astronomical tables schedule ritual, not weather. But astronomical precision, accurate to within 2 minutes per year across a 120-year span, exceeds any ritual scheduling requirement by orders of magnitude. Precision at that level implies predictive purpose. You don't build correction tables for drift if you're just picking dates for ceremonies. The Venus-Mercury-Sun configuration tied to the flood page occurs in calculable astronomical windows that can be projected forward mathematically. Climate scientists modeling compound flooding risk high precipitation events coinciding with compromised drainage systems and elevated coastal sea levels identify elevated probability windows within this century that overlap with the astronomical positions described in the Codex. The Maya astronomers who compiled those tables have been dead for 800 years. The tables are still running. They do not require anyone to read them to continue calculating. Gotzi stored the Codex in Dresden. Allied firebombing destroyed much of the city in February 1945. The Codex survived again. It is now in the Sächsische Landesbibliothek, dry in a glass case, indifferent to everything around it, calculating forward through time. From astronomy's forward calculation, we arrive at the final warning, the one that comes with a checklist. Number 10. The Zoroastrian End Time Signs. The year is 2018. A scholar at the University of Tehran publishes a comparative study in the Journal of Iranian Studies. On one side of the comparison, a list of signs from the Bundahishan, a Zoroastrian text compiled between the 3rd and 9th centuries CE, drawing on Avestan oral traditions dated to at least 600 BCE. On the other side, a summary of measurable current world conditions. The comparison takes 2 pages. It could have been longer. The Bundahishan and the related text Zandai Wayman Yasht contain the most detailed account in Zoroastrian literature of the period preceding the Frashakreti, the world's final renovation. Not extinction. not apocalypse. A remaking of what was broken. But the period preceding it is described in specific enumerated terms that require examination. Mary Boyce, professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London and the foremost 20th century authority on Zoroastrianism, documented this tradition across her 3-volume Enchke, History of Zoroastrianism, published between 1975 and 1991. These are canonical records of one of the oldest continuously practiced religions on earth. The sign list is not a fringe text. Count them. 1. The seasons will become confused. Winter will arrive in summer's month. Heat will linger past its time. The sky will no longer give rain and cold in their proper sequence. 2. Respect for elders will collapse. Youth will speak over their teachers. Children will instruct their parents. Age will no longer carry authority. 3. Lies will spread faster than truth and be more widely believed. Deceit will be called cleverness. The deceiver will be considered wise. 4. The borders of nations will dissolve and re-harden violently within a single generation. People will be formed and broken within a single lifetime. 5. Sacred institutions will be publicly mocked. What was once worthy of reverence will become material for entertainment and contempt. 6. Domesticated and wild animals alike will lose their instinctive fear of humans. The boundary between human civilization and the natural world will dissolve. 7. Metals and material wealth will be valued above all living things. The worth of a person will be measured by what they produce rather than what they are. 8. Water will become scarce and contested. Rivers and springs will be controlled by the powerful and withheld from those without power. 9. The forests will thin until the sky is visible through them from the ground. The covering of the earth will be progressively removed. 10. The established roles and positions of men and women will exchange and neither will occupy a stable social structure. The definitions that organize society will lose their boundaries. Of these 10 signs, Boyce documented 9 as present in canonical eschatological sources. Scholars applying them to current conditions generally identify 7 or 8 as clearly observable across measurable, unconnected domains. The mainstream explanation comes from Philip Krayenbroek, professor at the University of Göttingen and one of the foremost living authorities on Zoroastrian tradition. In his 2011 scholarly work, Krayenbroek argues that apocalyptic sign lists are moral instruments, not calendrical forecasts. They describe conditions of social stress that appear in every troubled century. Society always feels like it is ending. The signs are designed to resonate perennially, not to specify historically. But the clustering is the problem. 1 sign matching could fit any century. 3 could fit many. 7 or 8 simultaneously, across climate, social hierarchy, information integrity, ecology, economics, gender structure, water access, and ecological cover. That convergence across unconnected domains narrows the field considerably. It does not describe every troubled century. It describes one specific pattern. There is 1 sign not yet checked. The appearance of the Sayashant, the world renovator figure who precedes the Frashacredi. No one has claimed that title. Here is what these 10 warnings share, across 10 traditions, from 10 cultures on 5 continents, written without knowledge of each other. None of them describe fate. Every single one describes a choice. The Kali Yuga ends when Kalki comes, and the tradition preserves the signs by which to recognize him. The Hopi ceremonies resume when the Blue Star appears, and the ceremonies continue specifically because the moment is not yet decided. The 7th fire offers 2 paths, explicitly. Plato ended his text before the punishment arrived, waiting for the reader to look at their own civilization. The Sayashant will come, but the texts leave open when. These were not predictions. They were warnings. There is a difference. A prediction tells you what will happen. A warning tells you what could be prevented if you see it clearly enough and choose differently. 10 ancient voices, separated by oceans and centuries, agreeing on the same thing. The conditions are recognizable. The outcome is not yet determined. The choice is being made right now. If this video changed how you see the world for the next few hours, subscribe. This channel connects patterns that don't fit neatly into the mainstream. Leave a comment with where you are watching from. The map of where this reaches is itself worth knowing.